And I'm also going to ask that, I feel like everyone's doing it, but I'm going to say it anyways, just mute your microphone while you're not talking. Okay, so thank you all for being here. This is really exciting. We have people from like all over the place. I really hope that everyone finds this useful. So I'm Catherine Mercier. I'm a PhD student at City College working with Ana Carnaval. I did my undergrad in psychology and then figured out that I was sort of interested in biology and took a little time off and then did a master's and a PhD. So that's been my sort of direction, and I will be like moderating the discussion today. So the goal of this discussion is to give you all a little bit of background about how graduate school works, what it looks like, and maybe ease some concerns you have and give you some direction going forward. And so today we've planned like an hour and a half, and we're going to start with some introductions from the four graduate student panelists, and then maybe if Ana and Fabian don't mind introducing themselves. And then we'll go to the panel discussion and we'll cover some topics that were submitted by you all over the last week. And then finally, we'll have a question and answer session. And during the question and answer, we will use the like raise hand function in Zoom, if you all are familiar with that. But you can also leave your questions in the chat, like through the entire discussion, and then during the question and answer, like I can read them out loud and we can go back and forth that way. So let's go ahead and hear a little bit about our panelists. I'm really excited that you all could share your time with us today. And if you don't mind talking a little bit about where you are now, sort of your background, what you, your undergrad experience was like, what you did before graduate school, what you've done for graduate school, and maybe your like long-term goals. Andrea, do you mind starting?
Sure. Hi, my name is Andrea. I don't think I know all of you, but most of you. I did my undergrad in biology back in Colombia. And after my undergrad, I immediately got a master's degree in biology, again, at the same place. And then after that, I worked for a few years for a sort of government / NGO agency in Colombia that works on biodiversity. And then went on to graduate school again, now for my PhD in Ana's lab at City College. And I'm currently on the end of my 5th year in my PhD. And I think that was it, Catherine. Was there another question?
Maybe like your long-term goals, like if that informs why you wanted to go to graduate school?
Or look out. My long-term goals have changed during my career, so I'm not thinking about the same thing that I was thinking when I was an undergrad. I wanted very much to work on sort of conservation and more policy stuff when I was an undergrad, and when I finished my master's, I still thought that that's what I wanted, so I went on to that. I decided that's not what I wanted. I want to stay in academia. I definitely want to do research and teach. And Anna is laughing at me. And so that is basically to do academic.
All right, thank you. Connor, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Connor. I'm a second year, or finishing up my second year in my PhD in Mike Hickerson and Ana Carnaval's labs, EEB. And I study like population genetics, broadly speaking, how organisms have responded to past climate change, using PopGen to kind of investigate that. I have a special love for frogs, but I'm also studying insects and lizards too as part of my PhD. So I started out in undergrad as a music major and decided that I did not want to do that for a living at University of North Texas in Denton, Texas. And then I transferred to University of Texas at Austin. I went there because I knew there were frog scientists there and I knew that I liked frogs. That was like the basis of my decision, and it was a state school. So, and then did biology there, and then I worked for a semester and a summer after that as an after school, like science. They called it Camp Einstein, as like science and engineering for like little kids. I did that part-time, and I also part-time worked as a collections assistant at the Texas Biodiversity Collections. And then I got my master's at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, studying poison dart frogs in Peru. And then right after that, I came to City College. And in terms of future goals, whenever I switched to science, I knew that I wanted to do research, and that's still kind of the goal. I want to do academia and hopefully make money being a frog scientist.
Very cool. Thank you. Erica, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Johnson. I'm also wrapping up my second year as a PhD student in Rob Anderson's lab. Michaela, I actually wanted to tell you personally, I did see your email. We're going to get around to it and give you an answer soon. So I'm originally from Venezuela. I did my undergrad studies there in biology. After I graduated, I worked at a nonprofit there called Prodita, where I worked a lot with Red List of Ecosystems and developing methods for quantification of the risk of collapse of ecosystems. Through my work, I then met my next employer, which was EcoHealth Alliance in New York City. And there I got a lot into assessing the risk of zoonotic disease emergence. So kind of like COVID, diseases that originate from animals and spill over into humans, and how land use change might impact that, which is what I'm ended up doing my PhD in. I'm right now studying how land use change, specifically deforestation, might alter biotic interactions and how that in turn might affect the transmission of diseases and increase the risk to humans. So my long-term goal actually has been the opposite from Andrea, where she wanted to work in government and now wants to be an academic. I wanted to be an academic, and now I definitely want to work in government, like big government agency like the CDC or NIH, DOD, that sort of thing. So that's my long-term goal.
Thank you. And our last panelist is Patrick.
Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Shea. I just finished my 5th year of my PhD along with Andrea. In terms of where I came from in the past, I did my undergrad in biology, was initially on more the medical side of things, thought I wanted to go to med school, then PA school, and pretty much every other medical type school there is. But having worked with some of them in college, in some of those fields, found it wasn't really my thing. So during college, switched over towards the more ecology, conservation biology side of things. After that, after undergrad, I worked for about 4 or 5 years throughout the Northeast here in the US for some government agencies, state government agencies, and some other grad students who were doing wildlife research, conservation-based research, knowing that my goal was to go to grad school myself. So I was trying to build up experience for that. And then when I was ready to apply to grad school, I was making the decision between master's and PhD, and ultimately went for PhD. So that's how I ended up at CUNY, where I do research on coral reef biodiversity in Hawaii, where I plan to go afterwards, career trajectory. I think I was initially, when I came into the PhD thinking academia as well, but I've since opened up my options a little bit more, probably leaning more towards kind of like big government agency like NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or possibly even the more policy side of things to kind of apply what I've learned scientifically in other ways.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have this like diverse, I think everyone on the panel has really diverse experiences, so that's very cool. Anna and Fabian, do you all mind introducing yourselves? And do you mind if there's some questions that might benefit from a faculty's perspective, you know, sort of putting your
Sure,
opinion there?
you could put us on the spot, yes. But before I do that, you did not introduce your trajectory. So you want to say something about you?
Yeah, sure. So I am a PhD student now with Ana Carnaval, and I did my undergrad in psychology.
You did. You sort of
Yeah,
did.
I did.
Okay, my bad.
Okay.
You sort of did. Okay. You just did before them all. Okay. So I am Brazilian. I did my undergrad in Rio, and I found out that I loved frogs on my first field trip with one of my biology of vertebrates course. And I haven't really left frogs much, but my lab has forced me to look at other creatures and other hemispheres even. I decided that I wanted to become a scientist, so I went to a master's program in Rio. I did my master's in zoology at the museum that burned recently. I'm not sure if you guys know about that. And then I got my PhD in evolutionary biology kind of as an accident. My husband got offered a transfer to Chicago when I was finishing my master's degree. And he told me that he was not going to accept it because I was finishing my master's and we had just gotten married. And I say, are you fucking crazy? You go, and I'll go in a bit. I'll meet you there and I'll find a PhD program for me to do because I'm sure I can learn a ton by being outside of Brazil. So I looked for a program that I liked in Chicago. So I had the different path of everybody else. I did not decide where I wanted to go, given my interest. I decided that I needed to be somewhere and were the schools around that place that would accept me and would let me get some education. So I ended up launching in a fairly strong school, the University of Chicago. That's where I did my PhD in a very good program called the Evolutionary Biology Program. And from there, I went to a postdoc at the University of California at Berkeley with a guy that I really sort of liked. And from there, I came to CNY. Is that pretty good? Okay, and I think we work with historical biogeography and biological responses to environmental change. That's what we do, yes.
I guess it's my turn. So I'm Fabian Michelangeli. I am also from Venezuela, and I was a member of the board of Provita probably before Erica was born in 1992 and 91.
I was born then. I'm as old as Provita. That's how old.
So I got my undergraduate degree in biology there. Then I taught a year of high school there, senior biology. Then I came to the States. I got my PhD at Cornell University on botany and plant systematics. And after a postdoc at the American Museum of Natural History, I've been a curator at New York Botanical Garden for the past 18 years. I teach at the CUNY PhD program in biology. but I also teach the master's program at Yale University in forestry and environmental sciences, and those are completely different beasts. One is more academically oriented, like CUNY, and the master program at Yale Forestry is a much more applied master's, and so we can talk a little bit about that. And like almost everybody is, this is not a linear path. It's not that I always knew that I wanted to do biology, but it wasn't always planned. In fact, as an undergrad, I mostly worked on insects. I did some work on crabs. I did some work tracking tupinambis. So anything that somebody gave me a job, I would do. And then, so that's where, my passion was for biology, not necessarily for frogs like Anna or like Connor, but biology as a whole. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the panel discussion part, and the major sort of topics here are going to be the different types of degree programs and institutions, how funding works sort of generally for graduate school. There were lots of questions about admissions requirements and timelines, and then we'll end with a little bit about how to find prospective advisors and reach out to them. So the first question I'm going to address to Connor, and if you could just talk a little bit about the differences between master's and PhD programs and how you decided when each was right for you.
Sweet. So differences. I think so far the biggest difference between like master's and PhD is the pace and the length. So, master's is typically 1 to 3 years. I guess for biology focus, if you're thinking about research, it's typically 2 to 3 years. While, PhD is usually like 5 to, 7. Although, the AMNH has like 4-year PhD program, which is pretty wild. But, and the pace, so master's programs, for me, and I think for quite a few people, you kind of hit the ground running. It's less of like creating your own body of work based on your ideas and things like that. And it's more of coming in and your advisor has like projects that they've been working on or other people have been working on, and you kind of come and you can pick and choose and then kind of make them your own. So it's not like you're just doing a project for somebody, you get to make it your own, but it's less of starting from scratch in terms of how projects work. And so that results kind of in a faster pace. You have to get a project, typically 1 to 2, academic papers worth of a project done within 2 to 3 years, which, with PhD, you start a little bit slower, you take time to develop your ideas and you have a larger project, which is, master's is typically like 2 chapters, PhD is typically 4 chapters, although it varies a little bit. So for me, I did a master's because, well, my first round of PhD applications, I applied for PhDs actually right out of undergrad, and I didn't get into any of the schools that I applied to. So, I mean, that's, a hard stop in terms of going to a PhD program. And that was mostly because when I was an undergrad, I knew I wanted to do research, but I had started late, and my interests were kind of all over the place, and I did a bunch of projects but didn't finish anything. And something that's important, like that a PhD program wants to see is that you've finished a project, whether that's a publication or like a thesis, or presenting things at conferences. Like having finished projects is important, and I wanted to do everything and I didn't finish anything, so it's made other people a little more competitive than I was, especially for the programs that I wanted to do. And so I decided to work for a little bit, and I thought it over, and I was going to do another round of PhDs, but I got talked into considering master's programs because a couple advisors or people like scientists that I thought were cool put some ads out, and I was like, all right. I was about to accept this data scientist position, but I was like, yeah, I'll apply for these. Like, this seems pretty cool, and it's 2 years funded for the 2 programs that I was looking at. So I did, and I ended up not becoming a data scientist. And went to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. So in somewhere I hadn't heard of before I applied. And I kind of, the decision to do a master's was like seeing the people who had gotten the positions that I didn't get, and then talking to other like PhD students at UT Austin where I did my undergrad, and being like, what happened? And they're like, you got to finish stuff. And so master's seemed like a good opportunity to kind of formulate what I wanted to do, because like I wanted to study frogs, but like, what about them? My undergrad, I was doing 2 projects on fish from 2 different labs, and then a project on frogs, and a small thing on lizards. So like, as all over the place, and they all involved ecology, like one was in ecology, 2 of them were ecology, one was evolution, another was in ecology. So it was like, needed to figure out exactly, what kind of research I wanted to do. So I knew I kind of was liking genetics at the time, so I went with this genetics master's program with this guy whose papers that I liked happened to be one of Anna's old postdocs, as lucky happenstance. And yeah, I went there and had a really great experience with a master's. I wasn't as worried, like I wasn't super worried about institution. I was really, wanted to work with someone who I wanted to work with, and I didn't want to go into debt doing it. And so I worked with Jason, got one of my undergrad, 2 undergrad things out, his papers, and then got got my master's done, so a whole master's and a publication at least submitted, so I'd be more competitive for PhD programs, because I knew I wanted to do a PhD afterwards.
So it sounds like you maybe didn't know exactly what your research focus, what you wanted your research focus to be after undergrad, and maybe the master's helped you figure that out a little bit. It allowed you to, explore some avenues of research really related to what your advisor was doing, and then give you a clearer idea when you were going to do your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yep.
Fabian, I'd actually be interested to hear from you. You mentioned something about different sorts of master's programs. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what.
Yeah. So one of the things that you have to take into consideration is that many PhD programs, you as a student will be paid a fellowship, or you will have some sort of support through teaching or research assistantships, and they're in general very academically oriented. master's program are a lot more diverse, but usually the student has to pay to attend, although some have financial aid. And even within the master program at Yale, there are masters that are with a thesis and masters that are without a thesis. And the ones with a thesis allows the student to explore more if they want to go on an academic path or if they want to apply something specifically. The ones that are without a thesis allow the students to take more credits, and those are the type of students that end up in those programs are those that know that they are not going to go beyond the master's program, but they are seeking more expertise to go into more applied jobs. So something like policy making, in that case, land managers, congressional aides, there's a whole gamut, but there is sort of a very applied aspect there. So I think that what happens in the masters, there are sort of two different types of masters. One is where people that didn't have a strong background in something, let's say biology, that were music undergrads, psychology undergrads, English undergrads, want to reinforce or actually sometimes even learn from zero biology to then be able to go to a PhD. Or there are master's programs that are more to learn a very practical, specific skill set to apply afterwards. And in fact, you can even be, a psychology major, but then do the master's to do the apply route. So that you can do it all the way. I think the master's offers you, there are more diversity of them with different outcomes. Well, the PhDs the faculty, and that's our own fault, tend to train people a little bit more narrowly for an academic world, although I never discourage anybody that is in a PhD program to consider going out of the PhD, out of the academic world, to do more policy, to do more, even to teach in high school. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as if it is, you can apply what you learn and you're passionate about it. Hope that answers.
So given some of that information, Erica, I'm really curious about how you chose to do a PhD given your career goals. I'd like to hear about that.
So when I graduated from undergrad, I really thought I was going to be an academic. I got that job pretty much shortly after I graduated. And I was always thinking I was going to do 1 year and then do a master's. Ends up, life doesn't really work the way you want it to. And I was in that 2-year job. I also had the reality of Venezuela being Venezuelan, as hard as it was. So I had an opportunity to move to the States and had a job guaranteed and everything. So I decided to take that opportunity. And as I worked more and more in the nonprofit world, that is when my perspective sort of changed. And I realized I really like doing applied work. And I really like bridging science with policy, with government, I like working in that intersectional sort of world. And I love the stress of it. I kind of miss it. I think academia is kind of slow compared to what I'm used to. So yeah, it turned, before I knew it, 5 years had gone by. And I reconsidered, maybe I should actually go back to grad school because I saw, even within my institution, which was not a huge one, my jobs availability that were going to be available to me are limited because some jobs are only given to people with certain credentials. And at that point, I only had a bachelor's. I didn't even have a master's. So, and just as I was discussing with my boss, Carlos, who was amazing, he was my mentor, basically. He talked me out of it because he told me, you're just going to waste your time in a master's program, given all the experience you have and everything you've done. So just go straight for the PhD. I didn't know that was a possibility even. I always thought it was a requirement. It was a ladder. And it is for some programs, but it turns out that biology is very flexible for the most part in most academic institutions. So, by the time I actually applied, I had several papers out. I had a huge network of researchers. I already knew my advisor who I'm working with now, and he really wanted me in his lab. So through networking and all that, I just kind of decided this was the place for me, and this is where was going to develop that PhD, get my PhD, and then have a higher status and be more hireable in the, be more competitive in the job market for the types of jobs I actually want. That's kind of what drove me down this path.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I want to move to talk a little bit about funding and how PhDs and sometimes masters are sort of generally funded. Patrick, do you want to talk about funding, maybe how you've been funded? And I think actually all our panelists are funded in sort of different ways. It would be interesting to hear a little bit about everybody, but Patrick, you want to start us off?
Sure. So probably the overarching answer we'll get both from me and from everybody else here is that funding comes in a lot of different ways, through a lot of different sources. You heard we had it mentioned, Fabian mentioned things like teaching assistantships and research assistantships where you'll teach classes to get paid partially or even fully, or research assistantships where you'll work on a project and get kind of paid to do research within the lab. But there are any number of funding opportunities available. There are scholarships even at graduate level. There are different fellowships that institutions themselves will give you, maybe sometimes merit-based, sometimes based on the kind of program you're in. As for me, so within CUNY, we start off with our kind of first year of the PhD kind of paid for. So you focus your first year on classes and kind of getting yourself trained on the classroom side of things. And then from there, everything kind of diverges and splits off, where all of us have taken different routes. So I've been partly paid through teaching lab sections, and I even recognize some names here, students that I have taught, and also partly through grants. And then grants is an entirely separate beast of its own, where you can have grants coming from government agencies, from nonprofits, from within the university itself even. So my grant that I had for a couple of years doing my PhD was from a nonprofit, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And they were looking for a project to fund that was kind of using more cutting edge technology towards an environmental and biodiversity problem. So my project happened to be very well attuned to that, and we got it funded through them. But yeah, overall, it's been kind of picking and choosing and picking little bits and pieces of funding whenever and wherever you can.
Andrea, do you want to talk about how your funding has worked, and maybe also touch on tuition and tuition reimbursement?
Sure. So okay. So for my master's, I was funded as a teaching assistant, as Patrick was mentioning, and also as a research assistant, meaning I was working on a project that was not my research, but my advisors, and had nothing to do with my actual research, to sort of get my salary and something that was called a tuition waiver, meaning I wouldn't have to pay the tuition of my master's as long as I would be either teaching or working for my advisor, which is interesting, but also a lot of work. For my PhD, I try to look for a different alternative. So I got a fellowship, which was longer, so I would know that I had funding for 4 years in this case, and that fellowship would pay my stipend for those 4 years. Although I was lucky also to find a lab that had more money. So when I got there, Anna had her own grants, so she could complement my stipend and making it an actual living wage in New York City, which is something to consider, is that a lot of fellowships will give you a certain stipend that is a number per year, But that might not mean the same in New York than it means in Southern Illinois, right? So, so that's something to consider when you're using those fellowships. That Erica would also take fellowship. So it might feel like because I was coming from abroad to study in the U.S.
Well, it looks like
So
maybe
have been
we.
funded in different ways. Am I back?
You're back. You're back.
Okay, good. So after my fellowship was over, I've been funded in different ways, partially by Anna's grants. So that means Anna pays me because she wants me to finish my PhD. Partially by Rob Anderson's grant, in which I'm working as a research assistant, partially as a teaching assistant some semesters. And now I'll be funded by the university by their own dissertation fellowship, which again covers the stipend. And Catherine wanted me to talk about tuition. Tuition might work in different ways depending on where you come from, basically. So you can get a tuition waiver, which in CUNY you get for 5 years as a science fellow. And then after that, you can get partial tuition waivers. So it might be full tuition waiver if you're a resident of New York City or whatever, state we're talking about. If you are international, that might be just partial, so they'll cover the state tuition and you'll have to cover the rest. So it really varies on how much you'll get as a tuition waiver, depending on your fellowship and your status.
Yeah, so again, the overarching goal is sort of, there's some money, but it varies. Erica, do you want to talk a little bit about your fellowship?
Sure. So I got the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, the GRF. That's not the only one that's available. There are similar funding agencies that are government that provide very, very similar ones. So like NASA has Finest, with essentially the same. It's just NASA based. I think the Department of Defense has another one, which actually pays way better than mine. This fellowship pays for 3 years of your stipend and your tuition. Because CUNY specifically, the science scholars also get that tuition waiver that Andrea was saying. I get the tuition money, and I can use my tuition money through NSF for my research. So there's one thing. When you think of funding for your PhD, yes, your stipend is very important because it's what's going to allow you to live in the city and be able to go to school and all that, but you also need money for your research. And that will be either provided by your lab because your advisor has a grant money that is going to be used for your research. In my case, a lot of my NSF money is being used for stuff related to my research because the program officer at CUNY allows me to do that. So that's another thing you can keep in mind. Mind you, graduate PhD programs are supposed to last 5 years, right? And this only gives you money for 3. The CUNY Science Scholarship gives you a stipend for the first year. So I'm covered for 4 total. So these kind of things, try to think about them and when you budget the money that you need to go to grad school. Patrick was talking about smaller grants as well. Those are usually used for your research expenses. So they tend to be small, like less than $10,000. So keep that in mind as well. So yeah, basically when you apply for these sort of fellowships, mainly they ask for a little project proposal. It's a 2-pager usually. One of the good things about NSF particularly, I don't know if it's true for the other ones, they post the ones from previous years so you can guide yourself as to what they're looking for. But mainly what they want to know is that you can think of a clear hypothesis, an idea you can test throughout, and you have an idea of how you're going to achieve that throughout your PhD, and that you have the know-how and know how to leverage the resources that are going to be available to you. A lot of people apply for these once they know where they're going to be working at. I didn't really know where I was going to be, but that's not really a problem. It just helps you a little better because it gives them a more concrete idea that you actually have about the feasibility of your project. That's mainly what they want to know.
keep in mind, just brief intervention since Erica mentioned it. Many of these grants don't need you to know where you're going. That was also the case for Fulbright. I had to apply for the Fulbright Fellowship before I even applied to grad school, which also means that you get to apply for grad school with this extra thing on your application that says, I'll cover myself.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the project I got the money for, I'm not even doing anymore. So don't think that you are beholden to that. All they really want to know is that you have a capacity to carry out a project from beginning to end. So as long as it's like crazy different, I don't think that's really an issue.
Okay, thank you. Let's
Can
talk
I
a little
just
bit.
add something about this?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So not for now, but for later, I've reviewed many of these grants, the grant that Erica received, and I've been a panelist on this panel for NSF. So if people are interested in later on having an NSF pre-doctoral fellowship conversation, I'll be happy to. For this one, I would just add to what Erica said, that NSF is really not so interested, I feel, that's my reading, in the quality of your research. They want to see if you have potential for diversifying STEM. So this is really it's a diversity grant. It will fund minority students who are really promising. It will fund non-minority students with a proven track record of improving diversity in STEM. So, because I've seen many excellent proposals in this project, that in this program, that were not funded because the person didn't have that diversity aspect of it. And what I'm bringing this up is that as I see all of you guys here, you fit that profile so well. You guys are the diverse face of STEM. You live in the most diverse city, in the US. You've been living this as an undergrad, or you're bringing an international perspective in your own lives. So this is really for people like you. So if you guys want to do a session on that later on, I'll be happy to. That's it.
Can I add one more thing too? So Erica and I think Patrick might brought up the fact about the funding Andrea, you might bring your own funding, or the funding might be from the lab you're in, and both of them are totally valid, but they have different implications. If the lab is funding your research, most of the time you are going to have to find a project that fits your advisor close research program much more closely, because that's what the advisor has the funding for. That's why there is that money available for you, is to fill a hole in the program. Different advisors have different approaches of how liberal they are with that. Others are more strict. It also depends on the source of the money. If you come with your own money, then you can do a lot more of what you want to do, because the advisor doesn't have to tell any funding agency what you're doing with the money. But maybe that makes the advisor, in some cases, less involved and less interested. So, I mean, so in my case, when I was accepted to grad school many years ago, I was actually, Indiana came down to two places, and in one place I had my own money and I could do my own research, and in the other one I had I had more money, but I had to do this very tiny little thing that I knew that was going to be the rest of my life. I ended up going with a more of the unknown, but that's because that fit me. Other people might have liked to have the security, or even not the security, but this cool, really amazing project that was the other opportunity. So those are things that when you're, if you have more than one offer, if you have that luxury, that there are implications of where your funding comes from.
You can definitely have your own funding and try to make your research fit the lab anyway, which I think I tried.
Or make the lab fit your research. So one more thing. So I hope that for you guys who are hearing this for the first time, I hope it's clear that every institution is different, and within an institution, every student can be different. So this is a very important thing to be clear on as you interview or you think of the places you want to go. I think we're going to get to that point, but you really want to ask these questions. How are the students funded here? And ask not just the administration, ask the students. This is something that we're going to come later on. It's very important that you ask the people who are in the shoes that you want to be. How are you feeling, right?
So definitely how students are funded varies across universities, but also you all submitted a lot of questions about sort of how much do I need to worry about my GPA? How much do I need to worry about the GRE scores? And that's also going to vary across institutions. I was hoping Andrea could talk a little bit about how she's experienced that.
Yeah, so Catherine and I discussed this when she told me about these questions, and I said, I'm just going to show them my GRE so they know how bad it was. So they care in different ways. And in my case, I applied to 4 schools in the US. I'll tell you the schools. I applied to UC Berkeley. I applied to UC Santa Cruz. I applied to Colorado State. And I applied to CUNY. The GRE was too low for them to even consider, which was Berkeley. And then they explained they'll have like a pre-filter of the scores before they even get to the committee. But then the other school said basically, you know, this will go to a committee as long as you have an advisor that wants you and you come with the funding, so you'll get in. So it really depends on how the potential advisors, I don't know if you're hearing me though. I'm back. I can see the movement, so I know I'm back. It really depends on how the universities do the committees. When I talked to the potential advisors that I was applying with for every grad school, they sort of mentioned how this would work. And in many cases, they were absolutely convinced that I would be accepted because they wanted me in their labs. So that was the case for examples. They'll just ask the professor directly. Whereas others said there were committees that there was going to be a discussion, and others said we'll have a filter by points, and so you won't get through. So it's a matter of talking to the university, and they really cared about funding. So they always told me that the fact that I was bringing my own funding will make a difference in how it was considered.
Thank you, Andrea. One of the things that's... Oh, go ahead.
All right, Catherine, just one thing. I remember the question was about specifically the GRE and the essay. Yeah. Most schools won't even ask for it. For biology, they'll ask for like the other 2 scores, the verbal and the math. My essay was terrible. It was like in the lower 35%.
And even if, so a lot has changed like over the last few years regarding the GRE, but even if a school is still requiring the GRE, they're, I don't know, 99%, it's only the like regular GRE. Someone had asked about the like biology subject. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has, don't worry about that.
I had my PhD decades ago and I didn't take the subject. And I feel that, so CUNY, for instance, ditched the GREs, and definitely for all schools that I know, GREs are not read seriously for international students. For international students, only the TOEFL is looked at as a measure of, can this person speak or read, understand English? And yeah, I agree that these tests are less and less important. Much more important is to communicate. It's all about communication. It's to communicate with the program and the faculty members that you're interested in.
Yeah, so moving on to, oh, go ahead, Fabian.
If you have the best GREs in the world, the best GPA in the world, and your application lands at a committee and no professor in the room has heard of you, express your interest to work in her lab or whatever, they're probably not going to take it seriously, because that means you didn't even take seriously enough to contact the faculty. So that is a number one thing, is talk to the faculty all the time. And all those questions that Anna says that you have to ask, that will tell a lot to the faculty whether or not they want you in their lab. And the other thing, and Connor brought this up very well, is your ability to show that you can finish things. So if you have presented at conferences, and better yet, have you been a co-author on a paper, and better yet, being the first author on a paper, even as an undergrad, that is huge. And Erica said it too. She had a bunch of papers, so why was she going to go to a master's? So all of those things supersede a bad GRE. Now, a good GRE might help at the time of getting fellowships. So it's not that it's not to be fully dismissed, but it's not as important as it was definitely when I was applying to grad school.
So we've started talking a little bit about reaching out to advisors, but how did we find our advisors? Connor, do you want to talk a little bit about how you found prospective advisors and how you sort of reached out to them?
Sure. So, like I said, I did 2 rounds of PhD applications, and my second round, I didn't apply for any of the labs I had applied to in my first round. And that's because I had a better idea of, who I wanted to work with and why. But how I figured that out was during, my research, my project with my master's, I read a bunch. You read a bunch, and I kind of had an idea of whose names kept popping up in papers that I'd been reading. And I had gone to a couple conferences by the time I was applying for PhDs, and I had either seen talks by the person that I applied with for the lab that I had applied for, or their students or people affiliated with them. And so that kind of gave me a good idea of who I wanted to work with. And then in terms of contacting them, I did, for everybody, I sent an email, and in the email, I was like, hey, I love your research, and here's a specific reason why I like your research, and here's, and I just gave them, even if I had read a bunch of papers, I always provide a specific, I read this paper and really loved it, and then here's what I'm interested in general, and cut this to within a paragraph or 2. And then for one of the labs, I was going to a conference right afterwards. So I was like, hey, I would love to, talk at this conference, can we meet? Or it was, I'd really like to talk about research interests further. can we set up a time to talk if you're interested in that? And I let them know I'm looking for a PhD. I'm about to start applying to PhD programs. I didn't say, can I be a PhD in your lab? I was like, let's talk about research, and with one of them, I had to follow up a couple times. So don't be afraid to follow up. Even as a PhD student, I'm starting to understand why they didn't reply immediately sometimes. And I appreciate it when people send me an email, a week later if they didn't get a response. But yeah, and send follow-up emails like, hey, just regarding this email I sent, I'm still really interested. And none of them got mad at me, or at least they didn't let me know that they were mad at me. So no one cares. And then I talked talked with a few people I was interested in, and then found out through talking with them, I was like, well, actually, I kind of get bad vibes from these two people, right off the bat. And so threw them out. I was like, no, not even gonna, red flags, not even gonna apply there. And then another person, I asked about sent emails to their grad students. Oh yeah, I sent emails to grad students, at least one or two from all the labs. I told the advisors I was going to do that. I don't think, you don't really need to, I don't think, but I don't know. It's just what I did. And sent emails around and got rid of one more person. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I don't want to do this place. And then found, because funding was uncertain and grad students knew more about how things were working than the advisor was letting on. And so sometimes the advisor will tell you, hey, I really like you, but I just can't take anyone right now. So it's super important to send emails early as soon as you consider them. And yeah, with the 3 places I ended up applying, they just told me to apply. It's not guaranteed. They can't tell you that, hey, we're going to be able to take you, but they can encourage you to apply. And I applied, sent in an application. Now I had these people who I wanted to work with on board on the review committees, and their voice could, help get me there. Yeah, I think that's another point. Yeah. Oh, I can't. I'm not the moderator.
Yes, Anna?
I just wanted to add to Connor's point from the perspective of being the PI on the other side, because I want to reinforce this to you guys. You're hearing the voice of somebody who's applying. As a PI, I have to absolutely endorse what he's saying. It is, one, very important that you keep trying to contact us, because we have a gazillion things happening. And as I tell my students, if I don't reply to your email that day you send it, it's because your email made it to the second page of my mailbox and I will not see it. It is lost forever. You have to email me again, right? So, and faculty, everybody is overworked. With the exception of Rob Anderson, who separates his emails by category of prioritization and goes back to him, which is not normal and not frequent. Most of us in the real world just do it in a very messy way. So do insist. And what was the other thing that you said? I didn't write, but it was so important. Oh, yes. It's really important to talk to the students to verify the stuff that the faculty member is telling you. Because the amount of abusive advisor relationships out there in the world is not small. And there are a lot of famous, well-funded people in very good research labs that have a very bad reputation, and you will not know it if you're coming as a naive undergrad who's just talking to that wonderful author, right? So make sure that you email this person's former students and current students. You do not need to tell that person. You really don't. And, you know, as a PI, I actually ask my future students to talk to my current students because I am vested. I want to make sure that that person will fit. And there's no better way for the student to understand if she or he will fit if she or he talks to my students, who will tell Anna she is messy as hell. She will not keep her office organized. If you cannot deal with that, then you shouldn't go with Anna, right? Anna, she's a horrible micromanager. You should not go to her if she, you know, if you need somebody to tell you what to do at every single step, right? But, you know, Anna is not that horrible. Anna has some good sides too. They will, hopefully they will tell you the good sides. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that you want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, because what you're setting yourself for, and I think that a lots of undergrads especially feel that when you go to a PhD program, you're begging, please, please, please take me to your lab. Let me be a PhD. And you need to understand that the power is in you. You guys need to decide what is the relationship that you want to have. You have to decide who is the person that I really want to work with, not for the next 5 to 7 years of my life. Your PhD your PhD will be stressful. It will. It's not, it can be. It will be stressful. So you want to see what is the environment that I want to have that will make this experience the most interesting or profitable, or that would allow me to grow. So the power is really on you. When you go to interview, if people go to tell you to go to interview for a position, do not go thinking that they are the only ones interviewing you. You are interviewing them. You are seeing, can I fit here? Am I going to be happy here? Is my mental health going to support this kind of place, right? So just, a lot of undergrads don't see that because we feel like we're trying to make a place for ourselves in the world. So we'll take anything. Don't take anything. And I feel personally that a master's program sets you off better, either a master's program or some real job experience, like in the case of Erica, right? So having that baggage puts you at a more mature position when you come in, that you know a little bit more of what you want to be, what you like, what relationships you want to build. Erica wants to say something.
No, I just wanted to add on to that. I think that's a really good point. I always think of this little interview process as sort of like dating in a way. You're like speed dating all these people and figuring out if you have chemistry. But in the sense, it's also like, is the way I work compatible with the way other people work, regardless if they're nice or not. And like a good example for me is like, I like the Hickerson lab, but I really can't see myself working in the Hickerson lab, for example. It's just something that I would just be like, oh my God, these people are like, and I love all of them. So sometimes it doesn't even have to do with whether you like them or not as people. It's more of the working culture in a lot of times. So it's like, if you really feel like you're someone who needs a lot of guidance from your advisor, maybe going to a lab that has a ton of students is not the best place for you. And the opposite, I'm, for example, extremely independent and I hate micromanaging. So I fight a lot with Rob, but it's gotten better. So yeah, so it's like, you also have to consider that, where it's like, is this person's management style compatible with my working style? Because if not, you're just going to set yourself up for a lot of frustration. So yeah, there's a personal side, and you have to be compatible personally, but also from a working perspective. And I agree with Anna that coming from master's or with work experience kind of at least lets you know what you're looking for and what you're not in a lab and an advisor.
Thank you. I think both of those are really important things. And one thing that we haven't explicitly said, but I think is sort of been intertwined in this conversation, is that the important thing you want to be considering when you're, or the good school is going to be the one with the good lab and the good advisor. When you're picking your undergrad, you are probably, you know, thinking about the university as a whole, but when you're going to graduate school, it's really about the advisor and the lab and how that fits. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. Yeah, Andrea? After Andrea, we're gonna move into some question and answer. If you wanna put questions in the chat or, yeah.
Just a little extra about what you were saying. Yes, it's about the advisor. It's a lot about the advisor, but also moving somewhere for like 6 or 7 years is no small move. It's also about the place you're going to and whether that's a place that you'll be happy into. And that is, I feel, really relevant in how this is going to be, like the support network that you'll be able to build around your graduate school and outside of graduate school. So, and that really goes with your personality. So for me, it was really important for my decision that I was also deciding on New York for graduate school, that I was also deciding on moving to another country, but also to that specific city instead of moving to Fort Collins in Colorado. Like that really went into my decision of where I would be happy. And I think that decision would have been different for a different person. So that really, I mean, consider that when you already have a subset of advisors that you think are a good match.
Sorry, I just had one more thing to tack on there. Is it also depends on where you want to go afterwards. So you want to see where people that your advisor has, people that your advisor has advised, where they've gone after they've graduated. So, and sort of the department as a whole too. Like, I want to say school doesn't matter, but if you really want to be in an R1, you want to, you know, it's probably a good idea to be in a place where lots of people have gone on to be R1s because there's the connections aspect, but it's not the most important.
Connor, you just mentioned this thing, R1.
Oh.
What is that?
Oh, and R1 is a research-based university. It's like the, it's where I guess most, or at least like half, I think it's more than half of what you do as a faculty member is research, or at least it's most emphasized. And they're typically like larger schools and less teaching focused. And like R2s and I forgot what it's called, but the teaching universities or teaching schools, liberal arts colleges, are less research focused and more like undergrad masters. There sometimes aren't PhD programs at those schools, and some people want to do that after they get their PhD, you know, do more teaching based. And so the PhD program and the people that have come out of like the lab that you're looking at, they typically go to R2s or teaching based universities, then, you know, or if they go to R1s and that's what you want to do, then that's something to take into consideration. I don't think it's as important as the other things, but it's definitely something to think about.
Thank you. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. If you want to hear more about somebody's experiences or something wasn't clear, you can write them in the chat. You can raise your hand. I can read some of the questions that were submitted. I see Carolina has raised her hand. Carolina, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question specifically for Connor. When you were talking about kind of like how you would send your cold email to an advisor. So something that you kind of said was to send the emails early. Like what's early to you?
Early for me was like I think the earliest that I sent was like close, like right whenever I started my master's, which, you know, that's very early. But it was more to talk about research, like to establish a connection. Like establishing contact doesn't mean you have to be like, I want to be in your PhD program. It can just be, hey, I like your research. I want to talk with you. But really, like realistically, like a few months before you apply is good. Like, you know, 2 or 3 months. That way, you have a chance that they'll know their funding situation more, like closer to, you know, that application date and all the like detailed parts of things. But if you're like interested in someone's research, don't be afraid to just ask them a question or be like, hey, I like your research. I want to know what type of stuff you're doing right now.
Fabian, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so most applications are due in December or January, or let's say December. But the departments are starting to make decisions about funding and allocation and all of that early in the fall. So it's a good idea to start writing to their potential advisor that fall. So the advisor start to think, oh yes, there are students interested in me. I want to fight for my slot. And then if you even have more forethought than that, if you write the previous spring and you know you're going to go to a professional meeting. So let's say the evolution meeting or the herpetology meetings or ornithology meeting, whatever it is, you can write in May or so and say, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm applying. I will be at such and such meeting. Will you be there? Would you have 10 minutes for coffee or after your talk or something like that? And that is super helpful. Super, super helpful. You know, go ahead.
Yes, Anna?
So sorry. The
Go
other
ahead.
thing that I feel that is really also relevant about this is if you're not stalking this person, right? So if you're there at the meeting and the person is there at the meeting and you're presenting a poster or a talk, absolutely let that person know, I'm really interested in working with you and I'm gonna give giving the poster session blah 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 on Wednesday at 3 p.m. I would love if you could come and I could introduce you to my work or something like that, right? So make some societies now have an official way by which people can ask other people to go see their presentations, but most still don't. So if they don't, whenever you shoot this email to the person, just say, by the way, I would love, I'm going to be presenting this. If you could come, it would be a great opportunity for us to meet, yada, yada. That's it. I'm shutting up.
Okay, it looks like Andrea wants to add something, and then we'll go to Carla's question.
I was going to say, even if you're not applying this December, right? Many of you are not applying this December. Going to meetings is always good, and meeting the people is always good. Anna and I met, I think, 3 or 4 years before I even applied to go grad school. We met at a dinner in a conference.
Are you going to tell them how you realize that you want to work with me?
No, you tell them.
We were eating and people wanted to share this dish. It was an amazing fish. And Andrea was across from me. And I immediately said, I do not share food. I want all the food to me. And I think she immediately said, yes, that's the woman I want to work with.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, try to meet people in those conferences before you even apply. They'll become colleagues eventually, maybe not your advisor, but someone that can help you when you're finding grad school, someone that you will keep seeing at meetings, so definitely do that.
Okay, Carla, what was your question?
Hey, yeah, so going on, Connor, he was talking about the emails and all that. I just wanted to ask have another question after this, but some advice on good subject lines for like reaching out to these professors. I have trouble with those.
Interested in your work.
I think I was more straightforward. I think I said like prospective graduate student. Erica?
Same, like prospective PhD student, prospective graduate student.
Daniela, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Like what I've heard is that the financial aid is practically really good for like PhD. Master does not have that much financial aid. My question is more like, usually the financial aid for masters, is it like from the professor, the PI, or like a scholarship or the university? Like how do you ask for this if I want to do a master before like a PhD?
Should I answer this, or do you want to? Yeah. So this is a feature of the U.S. In Brazil, where I came from, master students were as well funded as PhD students. But in here, master's programs are sadly seen, for most cases, as a source of income. So you need to find this on your own, and it's really a mix of all of these things, Daniela. People will be able to claim for teaching adjunct positions. Master students can be added to a professor's PhD, not PhD, a professor's NSF-funded project, so they can have part of their costs run through that. And at CUNY, most of our master students actually have other jobs. They work elsewhere. Which is harsh. It's really, I feel like it's really hard for our master students if they're working somewhere else, because it's just competing for time. But I feel that NSF has been pushing PIs more and more to include funding for master students within their big research projects. So I'm seeing more people do that. Until recently, I had very few. I saw very little, few people doing that kind of stuff. So it's really a mix. Some of the money comes from the college, some of the money comes from the PI, some of the money comes from the own person. And Erica wants to say something.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that the fellowships, for example, a lot of times it's the same fellowship for master's or PhD students. So the one I have, master students can apply for that too. The thing is, where you kind of have to think about, because if you're thinking of finishing your master's in 2 years and it funds you for 3 years, I don't really know if you lose that money. So if it's not that great of a trade-off, but there are fellowships also for master students, is what I'm trying to say.
I just put in the group chat, there's this Google Doc that people like on Twitter and other places have compiled of in the US funded master's programs. So maybe take a look at that. And also, while I'm talking, there is I'm putting the Google link for a feedback form about this meeting. So fill that out, please. Carla, do you have another question?
Yeah, just real quick. So as somebody who's not going to be applying to grad school immediately after, what are some good things? I know some people worked. So what are some good things to do in like that transition period?
Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've done? Yeah.
Sure. So I think all told, between the time I graduated from undergrad and started the PhD, I think it was four years. Yeah. And during that time, I mostly was working on research projects that other grad students were working on. They had their own projects and they had grants either themselves or the lab did, where they had a field season and they needed help from people who had a biology degree and were looking for experience. I was doing things like trapping and tagging and following deer and bears around the Northeast. I was, for a summer, collecting ticks for Yale Public Health. Like, there's a whole range of different things you can do. But it was, for me, a matter of getting experience to show potential advisors that I was serious about this, because I kind of came to the whole ecology side of things a little later in college, and I didn't have publications or anything. So I wanted to show people that I was serious about this. And so that was a way to do it. And I even spent a year getting a graduate certificate in GIS, Geographic Information Systems, because it was something I didn't really have experience with. And I was seeing that a lot of potential advisors that I liked their work, they were looking for master's or PhD students who at least were somewhat familiar with something like that. So it's kind of a skill that they're looking to incorporate in their lab. And it took me a year. It was 2 semesters, 4 classes on GIS, and I was in, out, on my way, and had something to show potential advisors.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so we've come to about an hour and a half. I want to thank everyone who came today. I hope this was helpful. If you all did think this was helpful, we'll try and do a couple more of these like through the summer about different parts of the application process. But before we go, I want to get like one sentence of advice from all the graduate panelists and from Anna and Fabian. But I'm going to start with my piece of advice because no pressure. So I think the thing that I learned from going to my master's and my PhD is go somewhere where the people are happy.
I guess I'll jump in next here. I guess my piece of advice would be that if you don't already have it, you have to learn how to get pretty thick skin. If you don't already have it, by the time you get into grad school, you're going to develop it. So don't take things personally throughout the whole process. So like the following up with emails thing, just because an advisor doesn't get back to you doesn't mean that they're like, I don't care about this person. Don't take things personally. It's a busy life once you get to like the PhD level and beyond. So there's a lot of things going. Yeah, get a thick skin going.
It's a big commitment. It's a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay, we can hear you.
I was gonna say it's a really big commitment. So make sure you want to do research before you start. If you're not sure, go work, do a master's, think about it. It worked for me. I waited a long time to start my PhD because I wanted to make sure I can't.
Okay. Erica, yeah.
I guess my advice would be practical. I know that is not something that you hear very often, especially from academia, but not everyone has to be an academic, and I highly suggest going to places like Glassdoor and just doing a search of what the job market looks like there, because the truth is there's limited professorship jobs. So you can still use science and apply science to a million different things, and if you're really creative, that's awesome and great. So don't limit yourselves, and just try to find how you can make your research interests meet the real world. And I think that will make you go like so much further and open you up to a million possibilities that you don't even know about.
And
Fabian? Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Connor.
oh, well, my piece of advice was the same as Andrea's. Do a PhD because it's what you want to do, and like think hard about it, considering everything that everyone's said about what it's really like and what the jobs are like afterwards.
Okay, I'll go next. Oh, go Fabian.
Okay, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Ask everybody. Talk all the time. Don't be shy.
That's me. I guess my one, I have the parting words, I guess. My word is, these years of your PhD, they're years of your life. Don't see your PhD as something apart from your life. It has to be a part of your life, not your whole life. So wherever you decide to go and whoever you decide to work with, make sure that you're defending your sanity. Make sure that you're finding time for yourself, for your friends, for the things that you like outside academia. Make sure that you're not working full hours, right? Make sure that you have the weekends to keep sane. If you see that a very famous lab that you want to go doesn't have this, I don't know, vibe or understanding, I don't think that lab is worth it, really, because I'm just sick and tired of seeing students get sick or get out of science just because the rhythm is too crazy. So just keep in mind that this is going to be my life. I want to make it fit with the goals that I have for my life. Don't see your life as what's going to happen after the PhD. The PhD is part of it.
Okay, thank you everyone. Can we like have a round of applause for the panelists?
Oh.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for your
you,
This was
Catherine.
helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for organizing. You did a wonderful job.
welcome.
Yeah, good. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Hope this was helpful to you guys.
It
Yeah.
was so
Didn't
helpful.
confuse you
Thank so much.
anymore.
All right. I guess it's time for that drink, right? It's 3:30.
It's Friday, so
It's Friday.
Yeah.
So Saul went to the Blue Jeans link, but she
Oh,
saw
she
the
made it?
message.
Sorry,
She
so
made it.
sorry, it was late. I didn't see the Zoom link. So sorry.
No, but you came in pretty early, so you didn't
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my
miss.
God.
You didn't
And
miss
we
much.
have the recording. Actually, maybe stop the recording.
Yeah, sure.